She was 56 years old and she was standing in a room the size of a parking space when the letter came. Not a room she owned. Not a room she had ever meant to stay in. A weekly rental on the east side of Columbus, Ohio, where the carpet smelled of old cigarettes and the window looked out onto a fire escape, and someone in the next unit cried every Thursday night at exactly 10 o'clock. Quietly and steadily, the way a person cries who has been doing it long enough to get efficient at it. There was $94 left in Cecily Holt's checking account. There had been $91,000 in debt she did not know existed, loans her husband Ray had taken against the house, against a catering business he swore was profitable, against whatever he could get his signature on, while she was at work shelving books and helping third graders find biographies of Abraham Lincoln. Ray died of a heart attack in February 9 months ago, and it took the bank less than 6 weeks to explain to her, gently and in writing, what the rest of her life was going to look like. She had been a librarian for 27 years. She had organized the world for other people quietly, without being asked. She had known where every book was. She had known how to find whatever a person needed, and somehow she had not known that the man sleeping beside her for 24 years had borrowed $91,000 against the life she thought they were building together. The letter came on a Tuesday. It was from a law office in Harlan, Kentucky, a name on a map she had driven past exactly once, 20-some years ago, on a road trip south with Ray before things got complicated. The letter said that her great-aunt, Clara Holt, had died at the age of 84 of congestive heart failure, alone, in a building she had lived in for 41 years in a small hollow in Letcher County. And it said that, according to Clara's will, she had left everything she owned to her great-niece, Cecily Holt, the last of the family who still carried the name. Cecily read the letter twice. She had met Clara Holt exactly once in her life. She was 8 years old. She remembered a tall woman with gray-streaked hair and ink-stained hands, woman who said very little but who had pressed into Cecily's small palm a peppermint candy wrapped in a scrap of paper with 3 words written on it in pencil. For the road. She had kept the candy. She had not understood the note until much later, and by then, Clara was just a name her father mentioned sometimes. A woman who had gone back to Kentucky and stayed. She called the number on the letterhead. The lawyer, a man named Burlcombs, spoke in the careful, unhurried way of someone who has delivered this kind of news many times and has learned to give it space. He told her the property was in a general store Clara had run for decades, off Route 119 in a hollow called Shade Branch. The county assessor had come out 2 weeks prior. $2, just to have a number on the paper. The roof of the back section had gone soft. The pipes had been dry since 2019. The nearest occupied house was 4 miles off. She could claim it or let it go. Cecily sat on the edge of the rented bed after she hung up. $94 in checking. A husband who had borrowed against everything she thought she owned. A great-aunt she had met once who had left her a building worth $2. She thought, maybe that's right. Maybe that's the only kind of thing that fits a life that's gone to nothing. A worthless thing from a woman she barely knew, at the bottom of a hollow she'd never seen, in a county she couldn't find on a map without looking twice. But that night, lying in the rented room with the Thursday crying coming through the wall, and the orange glow of a streetlight pressing against the curtain, Cecily remembered the peppermint candy. She remembered the ink-stained hands. She remembered that her father had said since when she was a teenager, that Clara was the kind of woman who kept the light on for people. He'd said it the way you say something that you've always known to be true but never really thought about. The way a fact becomes a sentence only when you need it. She thought about that sentence for a long time. And in the morning, she bought a bus ticket south. Before we go any further, if this is the kind of story that makes you stop what you're doing and just listen, hit subscribe right now and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We make stories like this one for the people who sit with them all the way to the end. Now let's go back to Cecily. The bus took 9 hours. It wound south and east through country that got older and steeper with every mile, out of the flat Ohio farmland and up into the long ridges of eastern Kentucky, where the hills close in tight on both sides of the road and the sky shrinks to a strip of blue above the tree line. Coal towns strung along creek bottoms, a Dollar General and a church and a gas station, then nothing for 10 miles, then it again. Cecily watched it through the scratched window with a feeling she couldn't name. A feeling of going towards something she had always been going away from. Though she couldn't have said what. Burl Combs met her at the Harlan bus station in a truck the color of old mud. He was a heavy-set man in his 60s with a thick white mustache and the particular quietness of people who live in places where silence is normal and not a problem. He drove her the 40 minutes out to Shade Branch without much conversation, which she was grateful for. He pointed out landmarks the way a man does who has driven the same road so many times that the landmarks have become old friends. The rock face, where water seeps out year-round. The field where somebody's tobacco barn burned down in 2003. The ridge where a person can see 3 counties on a clear day. Then he slowed, turned off the blacktop onto a gravel lane, and there it was. A long, low-built wooden building, with a covered porch running the whole front of it, maybe 60 feet. The porch boards had gone gray and soft. The windows were filmed over with years of dust. Above the door, a painted sign. White letters on green faded to a ghost of itself. Holt's Store, established 1962. A dry gas pump stood at the edge of the gravel lot like a forgotten sentinel. And at the side of the building, barely visible behind a stand of young sourwood trees, a white oak that Clara had picked for herself. The mountains rose up green and enormous behind it all. A creek ran along the bottom of the hollow 20 yards off, and the silence had weight to it, the kind that presses down on a person new to it, until they either panic or settle. Cecily Holt did not panic. She had, after all, grown up in a library. Burl handed her a ring of keys and told her the generator was in the back shed, that the well was hand pump only since the electric had been cut, that his wife Della would come by the next day. Then he looked at her with his pale eyes, the patient, evaluating look of a man who has lived long enough in one place to see who fits and who doesn't. "Your aunt," he said, "was a woman this hollow needed. I just want you to know that before you see what it looks like now." He got back in the truck and drove away. Cecily stood in the gravel lot alone, with the dead pump and the ghost sign and the mountains pressing in from every direction. She walked to the porch, the key turned, the door opened into a long, dim room. Counters along both walls, a pot-belly stove in the corner gone cold, rows of empty wooden shelving behind a service counter that ran the full width of the back wall, dust thick on everything, cobwebs in the high corners, and the smell, old wood and cold iron and something underneath it, all that had soaked into the walls and the floors and couldn't be scrubbed out by time or emptiness. Coffee, old coffee brewed 10,000 times in the same pot on the same stove, absorbed into the grain of the building itself. And beneath that, paper, the smell of old paper, which Cecily Holt knew better than most any smell in the world. She stood in the middle of her great-aunt's store and breathed it in and felt, for the first time in 9 months, that she was somewhere real. Not a rented room. Not a bank's version of her life, somewhere that had been a thing and still was, even empty, even ruined, even worth $2 on the county books. She started to clean. It was what she knew how to do. You could not clean a whole ruined store in a day, but you could sweep one floor. You could wipe one counter. You could open the windows and let the mountain air through and watch the light change when the dust settled. She was on her knees wiping down the baseboard behind the service counter on the 3rd morning, when she heard breathing behind her. She turned. Sitting on the back step in the open doorway of the storeroom, wrapped in a green army blanket, was a girl, 17, maybe 18, with dark circles under her eyes, and hands that were chapped raw from the nights that still dropped cold off the ridge. She was watching Cecily with the flat, careful look of a person who has learned not to show surprise, because being surprised is a luxury that hasn't been safe in a long time. She did not run, which told Cecily something. "How long have you been here?" Cecily said, keeping her voice even. The girl held up 3 fingers. 3 days. The girl shook her head. She held up 3 fingers again and made a slow, wide gesture, the way you'd indicate something large and hard to measure. 3 weeks. Her name was Sable. Cecily learned that much in the first hour. She had grown up in a foster placement, 4 counties over, and had aged out of the system at 18 with nothing waiting on the other side. She had found the store by accident. While walking the back roads with no particular destination, had pushed the door open because it wasn't locked and she was cold. She'd been sleeping in the storeroom on a folded tarp. She was not deaf, she could hear fine. But she had not spoken. She wrote this in the notebook Cecily bought for her in town, passing it back and forth between them. She had not spoken for 14 months. Not since something happened in the last placement that she didn't write down Anne, and that Cecily didn't ask about, because some silences are the shape of a door a person keeps closed, and the right thing to do with a closed door is to wait. She had been living on creek water and canned soup she'd found stacked in the back corner of the storeroom. 12 cans, neat and deliberate, as though Clara had put them there for exactly this reason. Cecily looked at the 12 cans of soup. She thought about that for a while. Then she said to Sable out loud, "You can stay in the storeroom until we figure out something better." She meant it as a practical statement, but the way Sable's face changed when she heard it, just fractionally, just a loosening around the eyes, told Cecily something about how long it had been since anyone had said anything like that to her. On the fourth day, Cecily's hand caught on something while she was running a rag along the back wall behind the service counter. A panel shifted just slightly, the way something moves when it has been mounted to hide a gap rather than fill one. She stopped. She pressed her palm flat against the wood. It moved again. She got a flashlight. She worked her fingers along the edge and found the seam, the small gap painted over but not sealed, with the particular care of a person who hides something they mean to be found, someday by the right hands. The panel came away. Behind it, set into the wall, a tin box, dented around the edges, gone amber with the years. A strip of masking tape across the top, and on the tape, in an old woman's careful hand, 3 words. "Cecily, when you get here." Not if. When. We have to stop right there for just a moment. If you are watching this and feeling what we are feeling right now, take 1 second, hit subscribe, and tell us in the comments what you're thinking. Because this is the moment everything turns on. And we want to go through it together now. Here is what was in that tin. Cecily carried the box to the table by the front window where the afternoon light was strongest. She sat down. Sable stood behind her. She had come out of the storeroom when she heard the sharp intake of breath and had not gone back. She stood with the green blanket around her shoulders and watched with her careful, dark eyes. Cecily opened the box. Inside, a rubber-banded stack of papers, hundreds of them, folded and refolded, soft as cloth at the creases. Letters, not envelopes, just pages folded into themselves, and beneath them a smaller envelope sealed with Cecily's name on the front in the same deliberate hand as the tape. She set the envelope aside and opened the first of the folded pages. It was a letter, but not one Clara had received. It was one she had written for someone else. The heading read, "Written for Earl Combs, who asked me to set down what he couldn't. February 1981. It was a letter to Earl's son, who had gone to Lexington and stopped writing home. 3 paragraphs, plain, direct, nothing wasted. Your father is proud of you, even when he doesn't know the word for it. He asked me to tell you that. He wanted it written down so there would be no mistake." Cecily set it down carefully. She picked up the next one. Written for May Sloan, who cannot hold a pen due to her hands. A letter to the VA about her husband's pension, formal and precise, citing chapter and regulation, written in a register entirely different from the first. The register of a woman who had taught herself whatever she needed to know in order to help whoever walked through her door. The next. A letter of character reference for a young man facing a hearing. After that, a letter to a landlord in Hazard about a leaky roof that had gone unfixed for 2 winters. Then, one to a daughter who had not spoken to her mother in 11 years. One to a son who was incarcerated. One to a school board appealing a decision about a child with a learning difference. For nearly 4 decades, the dates ran from 1974 to 2013. Clara Holt had sat behind the counter of that store and written letters for the people of Shade Branch who needed words put on paper and didn't know how, or couldn't, or were too afraid to try. She had charged nothing. She had kept no copies for herself except this box. This one tin box left behind the panel. Not for herself, for whoever came after. Cecily's hands were shaking by the time she reached the middle of the stack. Sable was sitting across from her now, the notebook open on her lap, reading the letters one by one as Cecily set each down. At some point she had started crying, quietly, the tears running down without her wiping them. The way a person cries about something larger than what's directly in front of them. Near the bottom of the stack, the letters changed. They were not written for other people anymore. They were written to Cecily. Not letters Clara had meant to mail. Letters she had written knowing they would never be sent. Journal entries dressed as correspondence. Addressed to a great niece she had seen exactly once. Across the last 10 years of her life, Clara had written to Cecily the way you write to someone, when the writing itself is the point, when you write not to be answered but simply to be witnessed. Dear Cecily, a woman came in today with her granddaughter. The little one is learning to read and she asked me if letters were the same as words. I told her that letters are just words before they know where they're going. I thought you would understand that, being a librarian. Dear Cecily, I heard that Ray passed. I am sorry for it. I know that grief is a room with bad light and the furniture all moved, and that a person keeps bumping into things for a long time before their eyes adjust. You are on my list. I mean that literally. Dear Cecily, I am getting slower. I can feel it. The store has been closed since 2019, when my legs stopped cooperating. I've been thinking about what to leave and who to leave it to. This hollow is getting emptier. The families are going. I can't fix that, but I can leave the door unlocked. I can leave the light on as long as I'm able. And I can leave the rest to you, because you are a Holt. And Holts have always known that a word given to someone who needs it is not a small thing. It is the thing. And then, at the very bottom of the tin, beneath all the letters, Cecily found something that was not a letter at all. A document, folded once, stiff, typed on legal paper, gone yellow at the edges, a deed. 43 acres up the left fork of Shade Branch, including subsurface mineral rights. At the top in capital letters, held in trust for the family of Abel Banks. Per agreement witnessed 12th of April 1967, Clara Ann Holt, trustee. Cecily read it 3 times. She opened the sealed envelope. Inside was a single page in Clara's handwriting. Denser than the letters, more deliberate. Cecily, the deed in this box belongs to the Banks family. Abel Banks signed over his mineral rights in 1967 to a coal agent who came to the door and put a paper in front of him that he could not read. Abel came to me after. I could not undo what he had signed, but I had a cousin in Hazard who was a notary. And over the following months, Abel and I worked out a counter-arrangement that he signed, held in trust through me, contingent on certain conditions the original company never fulfilled. I filed it. It exists. I have been watching it for 55 years. The Banks family doesn't know this document exists. I tried to tell Abel before he died, but he didn't believe me. He thought it was too late. That men like him didn't win those kinds of fights. Maybe he was right for his time. He wasn't right about the document. A man named Renfro has been trying to buy my land for 3 years. He wants the creek frontage. He also wants what's under it, and he thinks that when I die, there'll be nobody left who knows. There is you. I leave you the deed and everything in this tin box, because you were the only Holt who still had the name, and because when you were 8 years old you stood at my window and looked at the mountains for a long time without saying anything. That told me what I needed to know about you. Keep the light on, Cecily. That is all it ever was. Your Aunt Clara. The sound Cecily Holt made then was not crying exactly. It was something older than crying. The sound a person makes when they understand for the first time that someone they barely knew had been quietly, stubbornly, faithfully on their side, across decades and distances without ever once making them know it. She had spent her whole life thinking Clara was simply a woman who had gone away. She had been a woman holding a door open the entire time. The man in the silver pickup showed up 5 days later. His name was Renfro, just Renfro on the business card. Meridian Land Holdings underneath, a Lexington address. He had the particular ease of a man who assumes that the women he speaks to will be relieved when he speaks to them. He looked at the store and arranged his face into an expression of sympathetic concern. "I'm so sorry about your aunt," he said, though he had clearly timed his arrival to the week after the funeral and the month after the death. "I have to be honest with you. This property is not worth what you might think. The building is a liability. But my company has a use for the road access, and I'm authorized to offer you $35,000, cash, today." Cecily looked at him from the porch. She thought of $94 in checking. She thought of the rented room and the Thursday crying through the wall. $35,000 was a number that could move a life. She asked him one question. "What's under the ground on the left fork?" Something behind Renfro's expression shifted, the way a wall shifts before a crack appears. "Mineral rights in this area are mostly played out," he said smoothly. "Not a factor." Cecily told him she needed time to think. She watched the silver pickup drive down the gravel lane and stood on the porch a long time after it was gone. That evening she drove into town with Burlcombs. who was, in the way of small places, a cousin of the very Earl Combs whose letter she had read, and she laid the deed on the desk of Della, the county clerk, a woman with half-moon glasses, and the patient, assessing look of someone who has been watching what comes and goes through a small county for a very long time. Della read every word of the deed twice. She set it down. "Lord," she said softly. "Is it real?" Cecily said. "It is real," Della said, "and it is as ironclad as anything that has ever come across this desk." She took off her glasses. "Abel Banks's granddaughter works in Whitesburg. Her name is Tamsin. She has 2 kids, and she's worried about money every day of her life that I know of." The Banks family had not won a fight like this before, not in Letcher County, not in the memory of anyone still living in that hollow. But Abel Banks had gone to a woman who wrote words for people who needed them, and she had written the most important one of all. Not on paper but in a legal filing at a county courthouse in 1967, and she had guarded it in a tin box behind a wooden panel for 55 years, waiting for the right hands to carry it forward. When Renfrew came back 3 days later with a revised offer of $50,000, Cecily was sitting on the porch with Sable beside her and Burl's truck parked in the lot. She let him finish his full speech. Then she said, "Mr. Renfrew, you have been trying to buy my aunt's land for 3 years. You drove out here because you thought she was dead and the deed was gone, and nobody was left who knew. She said it the way a librarian states a fact, without heat, without performance. The Banks family's attorney has been aware of the deed since yesterday morning. And I filed a restriction on this property this week. This land can only be used as a place of community for the people of this hollow, the same purpose my aunt ran it for 40 years. You cannot build anything here that changes that. So you can take your contract and go on back to Lexington." Renfrew opened his mouth. Then he looked at Sable, who had a notebook open on her lap and had been writing down everything he said since he arrived. He looked at Burl, who leaned against the truck with his arms crossed, and the expressionless patience of a man who has all day. He looked at Cecily. He got in his truck and left. The dust settled back onto the gravel. The creek ran on at the bottom of the hollow. A pair of crows called from the white oak at the edge of the property, and then were quiet. Before we tell you how this ended, if this story has stayed with you, and we think it has, take 1 second and share it with someone who needs to hear it, and leave a comment telling us, someone ever been quietly on your side for years without you knowing? Because that's what this story is really about, and we want to hear yours. The decision to stay was not made in a single moment. It came the way real decisions come. Not as a choice you walk through, but as a road you look back on and realize you have already been walking for a long time. Cecily used the trust Clara had quietly built, 41 years of money saved from the store, from odd jobs, from what the people of the hollow had pressed into her hands over the decades, to fix the roof, to clear the porch boards, to get the hand pump working and the potbelly stove sound. Sable turned out to know more about basic construction than either of them had expected. She had learned things, growing up, in the particular way that kids in hard placements learn things, by watching adults and figuring out how the world worked because nobody was going to explain it to them. Tamsin Banks came out on a Saturday morning in November with her 2 children and stood in the middle of the store for a long time without speaking. Then she sat at the table by the window, and Cecily laid the deed in front of her, and she read it slowly, twice. When she looked up, her eyes were bright. "My granddaddy talked about your aunt," she said. "He said she was the one person in his whole life who believed what he said without needing him to prove it first." Cecily thought of Clara at her counter, ink on her hands, writing words for people who needed them. "I think that was the whole point of the place," she said. The people came back to Shade Branch the way people returned to a thing they thought was lost, carefully at first, then with more confidence. A woman who'd driven past the store for 30 years stopped in one Tuesday when she saw the lights on inside and stood in the doorway a long time before she came in. A retired man 2 hollows over started coming by in the afternoons, sitting on the porch with a thermos, saying very little, which was fine. Because Cecily had learned from a woman she'd barely known that presence itself is a form of kindness, that the company of a person who does not require you to perform or explain can be the rarest and most necessary thing. Sable stopped writing things in the notebook and started saying them out loud, quietly, 1 or 2 words at a time, the way a person learns to walk again after an injury, testing the weight. checking whether it holds. It held. In the evenings, when the mountain dark came down fast and blew over the hollow, Cecily would brew a pot of coffee on the old stove. The same stove, the same pot, the same smell soaking further into the walls. And she would sit at the table by the front window with the tin box open in front of her. She had put the word out, quietly, through Burl and Della and Tamsin. If anyone had something that needed to be said and didn't know how to say it, they could come to the store. She would sit with them. She would write it down. She was not Clara. She didn't pretend to be. She was a 56-year-old woman with a bad knee and $94 to her name 9 months ago, and a great aunt she barely remembered who had left her a building worth $2 and a tin box full of 55 years of quiet, faithful love pressed into paper. On the first hard, cold night of winter, a woman knocked at the store door at 9 in the evening. She had a toddler asleep on her shoulder and a gas can in her other hand, and the look of someone who has been holding herself together by sheer force of will for so long that the holding has become the only thing she knows how to do. Cecily opened the door. She did not ask any questions. She had learned that from a woman she had met once when she was 8 years old and would spend the rest of her life understanding. She put the coffee on. She found the old quilt in the back of the storeroom. Clara's quilt, folded on the same shelf as the emergency soup, as if it had always been waiting its turn. She wrapped it around the woman's shoulders. She let the woman sit. Later, when the woman had eaten and the child had been settled and the silence in the room had moved from the sharp silence of fear to something softer, Cecily went to the table by the window. She opened the tin box. She took out a clean sheet of paper. She picked up the pen. She wrote the date. She wrote what she knew, a woman, a child, cold, no gas, a door open. She wrote what Clara had always written at the bottom of every record she'd kept. Sent on safe. Then below it, in her own hand, she added what she had decided was hers to add. C. Holt, keeping the light. She set the paper in the tin box. She closed the lid. She looked out the front window at the dark hollow, and the creek she could hear but not see, and the ridge above it all where the stars were out in numbers she hadn't known existed until she came to this place. A long time ago, an 8-year-old girl had stood at this same window and looked at the mountains without saying anything. A tall woman with ink-stained hands had watched her and known something, and had spent the next 48 years keeping something safe, leaving it in a tin box behind a wooden panel, with a note that said, "When you get here." Here she was. Some people find the place that was waiting for them early. They grow up in it, or walk into it young, and feel the floor solid under them and never need to look further. And some people have to lose everything else first. The house, the husband, the savings, the version of themselves they'd been holding up for 27 years, not because the loss was the point, but because without it, they would have kept driving past. Clara had known. Cecily had been on her way here her whole life. She just hadn't known she was traveling.